another. I'm just invincible. But that was really
1981. Wake up.
To wake up your mind, open your eyes and realize. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up.
It's time for a lot of you to wake up and actually see what's going on in our world today.
You don't have a democracy when you don't have a free press. What future does your children have if you're afraid to tell the truth? The genie is out of the box. The cat is out of the bag. The people all over the world are waking up.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your door, buy guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love instead see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times over, not one human being excluded, and we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace. Thank you very much. You've been great. I hope you enjoyed it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Wake Up Call. I am your guest host, Popeye. I host a broadcast here on the Orion Talk Radio Network called Down the Rabbit Hole. It's on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time, and on Sundays, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Rudy couldn't make it today. He had something come up and asked if I could fill in for him, and I'm glad that I could be here sitting in for you guys today. And I have a bunch of interesting things I'm going to present to the listeners. Some of you may know some of the stuff I'm going to play for you because I'm going to play some audio, and some of you may not. I have a interesting piece that I'm actually going to play for most of the first hour. It is audio from a documentary that was put together, part of a 9-part series for the History Channel by a man named Nigel Turner, starting back in the 90s, going up until the early 2000s. I myself have interviewed a few of the people that were in these this 9-part series. It's about the Kennedy assassination. Now, if you go on Netflix or if you go on the History Channel on their website and you look up the men who killed Kennedy, it'll tell you that it is a 6-part series put together by the History Channel and filmmaker Nigel Turner. Well, they're lying because it's a 9-part series. There's actually 3 more pieces that were round filed. in, I believe it was 2002, late 2002 into 2003, around that time period. And LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, was already dead, but his wife was still alive at the time, Lady Bird. And somehow, I guess she had gotten wind, or somebody in the family had gotten wind about the 8th episode, or excuse me, part 9, which is entitled The Guilty Men, and it exposes Johnson's involvement and his crew's involvement in the Kennedy assassination. And Lady Bird Johnson got wind of it and did not like it, and through her connections and their money, because they still had a big fortune and a pretty big estate, and her connections through people like George Bush and Bill Clinton, the History Channel was pressured, and they removed it. And they removed Part 8 and Part 7. And Part 7 it talks about the shooters and the different guns, or the Mannlicher Carcano that he supposedly used, and how the gun, he couldn't have pulled it off. And Professor Jim Fetzer is interviewed. I've interviewed him myself. Part 8 is called The Love Affair with Judith Baker. In fact, you can Google or just look up Judith Vary Baker or the book Me and Lee. I've interviewed her 3 times. You can go to my website, federaljack.com. In the search bar, just type in Judith Vary Baker, and all the interviews and stuff I have about her will pop up, and you can scroll through it. She's a very interesting lady. In fact, the Part 8 was the first time I had ever heard of her when I first saw it. And then I started researching her for a long time before I actually was able to interview her myself and verify for all intents and purposes, from what I can tell, she is the real deal. Anyway, these 3 episodes were blocked and round filed, sent to the memory hall forever for you not to have access to. They deny they even exist. Unfortunately, because of the information that was put forward, poor Nigel Turner has not worked. I've talked to Judith about this, and he kind of like disappeared and fell off the face of the planet. So Lord knows what they told him or what they said to him, but I'm sure to keep his family safe, he's kept his nose clean, as they would say. Anyway, I'm going to start playing the audio for you, and then coming in and out of the breaks, I'm just going to pick it up. Like I'll let you know when we're going to break, but coming back in from the commercial breaks, I'm going to pick it up with the audio so I can fit as much of the audio from this in, because not many people even know this exists. You can look up the full video, which I urge you to do, on YouTube, or go to my website, federaljack.com, scroll down a little bit on the right-hand side, you'll see a widget for Truth Movie section, and when you go there, go to the JFK section, and they're all there, all 9 parts. There's links to all 9 parts there. So go check it out. And by the way, it's all free. I don't charge for any of it. Or you can just go to YouTube and look up The Men Who Killed Kennedy, The Guilty Men. Here you go. Here is the audio from The Guilty Men, Part 9 in the 9-part series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Hello, I'm Steve Gillen, historian for the History Channel. The tragic death of President John F. Kennedy 40 years ago is one of the greatest mysteries in American history. In other programs, we have presented numerous theories about the people and events surrounding the assassination. Many of those scenarios, including a mafia cover-up, CIA involvement, and a possible Cuban connection, have been presented in our series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy. This episode, The Guilty Men, examines yet another theory, that President Lyndon Johnson was involved.
I know, as attorney for Lyndon Johnson, that he murdered John Kennedy. He murdered John Kennedy to become president and to avoid prison, and there is no doubt in my mind.
You can't kill the President of the United States unless the next president, the head of the FBI, and the head of the Secret Service are in on the cover-up.
I'd like the entire world to know how I personally feel is the fact Lyndon Johnson knew about the assassination and was a part of it.
Deep in the heart of Texas lie buried some of the darkest and most well-kept secrets that tell us who killed John F. Kennedy in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, and why. those forces of darkness revolved around one of that state's most famous political sons, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
And I'm going to pause it right there because we're going to break. When we come back, coming right back from the commercial break, we're going to pick it up with the audio, right where we're leaving off, of The Guilty Men, Part 9, in the series The Men Who Killed Kennedy. We'll be right back.
Born in 1908, he grew up in a comfortable middle-class home in Johnson City. At an early age, Lyndon showed a keen interest in politics. From the beginning, he was driven by a determination to win, whatever the cost.
In a word, he was ruthless. There wasn't anything he wouldn't do to get what he wanted, regardless of what it was. And probably the best example would be in 1948 when he was running for the Senate. And he was running against a man named Coke Stevenson. And the election was very, very close, a very small number of votes, which forced a recount. And once they did the recount, they found out a 201 vote error in a little place called Alice, Texas. And eventually they found out that the 201 votes had been added. 1 for Stevenson, 200 for LBJ. As a result, he won by 87 votes, and he was nicknamed Landslide Lyndon.
But the real name, the name used in the backwards that didn't appear in the newspapers, was Lion Lyndon. And that stuck with him the rest of his life.
That rigged ballot became the template for a political career based on bribery and corruption. The full extent of Johnson's criminal activity only began to unravel 11 years after his death. In 1984, at this courthouse in Franklin, Texas, a former Johnson business associate, Billy Celestes, appeared before a grand jury.
According to Billy Celestes, there were 8 murders perpetrated on the part of Lyndon Johnson. The first name was a man named Douglas Kinzer. That was followed by a number of men involved in Estes businesses who were corrupt, and they were all killed with carbon monoxide. Josepha Johnson's name is listed on this Justice Department document. That's Lyndon Johnson's sister. So Estes is accusing the Vice President of the United States of murdering his own sister. And the 8th name listed is the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And then there is a promise of knowing more. And if Billy Celestes is telling the truth, and there is every reason to believe he is, it gives you an idea of the depth of the corruption and the ruthlessness of Lyndon Johnson.
According to Estes' written testimony, that murderous cycle began in 1951 in Austin, Texas, at this downtown golf course known as Butler's Pitch and Putt. The killer was a Johnson henchman called Malcolm Wallace.
Malcolm Wallace was born and raised in Texas. He was Texas bred, Texas educated, a very intelligent man. And when he graduated from the University of Texas, he was evidently recruited by Lyndon Johnson, and he was given a job at the Federal Department of Agriculture.
John Douglas Kinzer, the golf pro at Butler's Pitch and Putt, was having an affair with Wallace's wife and with Lyndon Johnson's sister.
Lyndon Johnson's sister, Josepha, was an alcoholic. She was a drug user. She was sexually promiscuous. She had loose lips. And who knows what she might tell Kinzer or others about Lyndon Johnson's political shenanigans.
Malcolm Wallace walked into the Pitch and Putt golf course in Austin, Texas, and shot to death in cold blood John Douglas Kinzer.
Kinzer died here for his indiscretions. Wallace was soon arrested and went on trial in Austin 3 months later.
First-degree murder, open and shut case. He gets a lawyer, known as a Lyndon Johnson lawyer. So Lyndon Johnson is going to do his best to get his friend out of hot water.
During that trial, Lyndon Johnson took a room at a local hotel, and the 10 days that trial was going, constantly sent runners from the hotel to the courthouse to bring him word of what was going on during the trial. So he followed the pulse of the trial very, very carefully.
Malcolm Wallace is found guilty of first-degree murder, but through influence of Lyndon Johnson, Malcolm Wallace receives a 5-year suspended sentence. Lyndon Johnson was able to get his man out of first-degree murder.
Much of the control Johnson exercised was acquired through an early alliance with a fellow Texan. Edward Clark gained unrivaled power in the late 1930s with a series of high positions in the state government. He became Johnson's lawyer and a formidable ally throughout his career.
The power Edward Clark exercised covered almost every avenue of government power in the state of Texas. He would make sure that important appointments were covered by his men. The judges' control was through their vote. I mean, he had their decision in the palm of his hand. And this was, of course, important because Austin was the capital of the state. Anything that happened legally went through Austin, and that meant it went through Clark. He was known as the secret boss of Texas. He could and did arrange for people to be killed. He arranged for money to be laundered. He had that control.
This building in downtown Austin became the headquarters of Edward Clark's all-powerful law firm. Barr McClellan was recruited as a young lawyer in 1966, 3 years after the assassination, unaware of the dark secrets hidden within. Soon after joining, in an after-hours conversation with John Coates, one of the firm's attorneys, Barr was made privy to an astonishing piece of information.
Coates and I started talking, and in the course of it, John told me, if the truth be told, Clark arranged the assassination of Kennedy. It was a kind of statement that you can't easily forget, even though I personally chose not to believe it at the time. It stuck with me. Attorneys know they're acting behind a privilege. They can say things to each other. And this talk would go on at after-hours drinks, at Christmas parties, just traveling on the road. And it was like Johnson had to get Kennedy out of the way. I worked closely with Don Thomas, and Thomas was the business attorney to the president and was the second man in the law firm. Thomas and I did a number of cases together, and we traveled the state because he did not fly. We'd been to Dallas one day shortly after I became partner, and it was driving back. And just out of the blue, it seems now, looking back, Thomas said, "I am the only living man who knows what happened in Box 13. And we know what that meant. That was the stolen 1948 election. I didn't say anything. Sometimes it's best just to listen. And then he looked away and added, but Clark took care of things in Dallas. At that point, what I'd been hearing in the law firm, what John Coates had first told me, I knew was true, because this came from a man that was Johnson's business attorney, one of Johnson's most trusted confidants, a man who worked very closely with Johnson during his maturing years, his growing up years, so to speak, and as president. And when I heard that, there was no question that Clark had been behind the assassination, and he'd done it for Johnson. I know beyond a reasonable doubt that Johnson murdered Kennedy. He acted through Clark. He saw that it was done, and he did it out of a corruption of power that is unequaled in our history.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop it right there because we got a break coming up. But don't fret, 3 minutes. When we come back, I'm going to pick it up coming out of the break, right where we're leaving it off. More of the censored memory hold episode of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, The Guilty Men, when we come back. Don't go anywhere.
You've been watching The Men Who Killed Kennedy, The Guilty Men, a program which presents just one of the many theories about the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
After becoming a senator in 1948, Johnson developed an unrivaled power base in Washington, using his forceful personality, political skills, and corruption. He established himself as one of the most influential men in the nation, but as vice president to Kennedy, he lost much of that authority. By 1961, his past was catching up with him. In Texas, Henry Marshall, a local agricultural official, had begun investigating one of Johnson's illegal sources of funding. Working out of these offices in Bryan, Texas, Marshall had become aware of Billy Solesti's misappropriation of federal cotton allotment funds. Attempts to buy off Marshall had failed, and his investigations were beginning to threaten the vice president himself.
Billy Solestes became worried. Lyndon Johnson became worried. And some of them got together and decided, what are we going to do with Henry Marshall? So on one particular day, according to Billy Solestes, Cliff Carter, an aide to Lyndon Johnson, the vice president of the United States, and Malcolm Wallace got together. And finally, Lyndon made the statement, get rid of him.
On June the 3rd, 1961, Henry Marshall failed to return home. An extensive search was made of the family farm near Franklin, Texas. His only son, Don, was 11 years old at the time and remembers that day well.
My uncle found him on the second attempt when he went out to the place. He was in a very remote location, probably about 3/4 of a mile off the road. My mother had this stone placed here in order to mark the spot. The truck had blood around the sides of it. The side on the passenger side had a dent in the fender behind the passenger door, and that's apparently where my father's head was knocked into the side of the truck, and he had his eye damaged at that point. There were a number of yopon bushes that had been broken, and the gun was laying beside the body, and pretty much nothing else could be seen except signs of a struggle.
Local officials immediately ruled it a suicide, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
He had been shot 5 times with a bolt-action rifle. He had enough carbon monoxide in his lungs to cause him to pass out at the time he died. There was no effort made to collect any evidence or preserve the crime scene. They had pretty much determined in their minds that this was going to be a suicide. When Billy Solestes testified before the grand jury in Franklin, he implicated Cliff Carter and Malcolm Wallace as the people that were most involved in my father's murder. Wallace being the trigger man and Cliff Carter being the one who arranged for the murder. I'm firmly convinced that Malcolm Wallace was the killer of my father. Who that would have aided, probably political power behind everything. Johnson would have been aided more than anyone else.
The grand jury concluded Henry Marshall in 1961 was murdered, which means in simple language that the grand jury believed Billy Solestes when he told them that Lyndon Johnson had ordered Malcolm Wallace to kill Henry Marshall.
But Johnson's dark dealings were not confined to Texas. In late summer 1963, one of his long-term partners in crime was about to be exposed for corruption by a Senate investigation.
Bobby Baker was the secretary to the Senate majority. Basically, he was the secretary for the Senate, and he was one of Lyndon Johnson's closest associates. And everything that Lyndon Johnson wanted to perpetrate, he had Bobby's help. Essentially, if somebody wanted to get a military contract and they wanted influence of Lyndon Johnson to help them, they had to pay off Bobby Baker, who would then pay off Lyndon Johnson. It's the world of bribes. Bobby Baker was involved in a call girl service. He was involved in real estate scams. He was involved in dealings with organized crime. He was in dealings with oil men, particularly Clint Murchison, an oil millionaire from Texas. So as a result of all this, Bobby Baker was in big trouble. And with a little bit of inspiration on the part of the Kennedys that they could get Bobby Baker to talk, Lyndon was all done. Lyndon Baines Johnson, if Robert Kennedy had his way, would not only not be on the 1964 ticket as the vice presidential candidate, but he would go to jail for the corruption that he was involved with.
Although Johnson faced political extinction at the hands of the Kennedys, he had powerful allies with their own agendas that threatened the president, as researcher Gregory Burnham explains.
People would think that he had no enemies. He was so popular. He smiled. He appeared happy. Everyone loved him worldwide. But what people don't seem to understand is behind the scenes, he was making changes, and he was making them decisively, and he was taking some very, very daring steps. He was committed to pull out of Vietnam. By October, he had signed a document, an SAM 263, to that effect. 1,000 troops home by Christmas, and all personnel out of Vietnam by 1965. But that wasn't very good for the military-industrial complex. Is abolishing the Central Intelligence Agency, pulling their teeth, holding them to task, back to why they were originally created by Truman. Their original mandate by law is only to coordinate intelligence, not to create the Bay of Pigs. NSAM 55 told the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that the CIA no longer can do that, and any military operation has to come directly from them to the president, period. That kind of a document really causes problems.
But Texas was home to Kennedy's most dangerous opponents.
Oil millionaires and billionaires in Texas were petrified of one major factor that John F. Kennedy was considering, cutting the oil depletion allowance. And there was no way they were going to allow that. Essentially, they would save billions of dollars if it stays as it is. It was called a 27.5% oil depletion allowance. John Kennedy thought it was too liberal. One of the key men in this case is Clint Murchison. Clint Murchison is an oil millionaire, owned 500 companies, but he was primarily an oil millionaire. He also controlled Texas, controlled Johnson. His major means of operating and controlling people and influencing people was a little hotel called the Hotel Del Charro in La Jolla, California. It cost $100 a day in the 50s. And at that hotel, he would invite all these powerful, influential people. Richard Nixon would come there. Key lieutenants of Carlos Marcello, the head of the mafia in New Orleans, used to vacation there. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, used to vacation there. Free. Every summer for 10 summers. Free.
Another Johnson man with close ties to Murchison was a wealthy Texan called D.H. Byrd.
D.H. Byrd was an underboss for Murchison. He was a Del Charro regular. He owned the Texas School Book Depository. He also founded the Civil Air Patrol, which was a kind of military organization, and Lee Harvey Oswald was a member of the Civil Air Patrol. Another associate of Murchison at the time is Bobby Baker. Bobby Baker's in trouble with the scandals, and he was in all kinds of business deals with Murchison, and many of them were illegal. So Murchison was concerned that Baker and that corruption would lead to his door. And maybe not only would Baker go to jail and Lyndon go to jail, but maybe Murchison would go to jail.
As the forces hostile to Kennedy grew in strength and number, they began to think the unthinkable: assassination. Finally, a new imperative forced their hand.
Lyndon Johnson was in big trouble. The Bobby Baker scandal and the Billy Celeste scandal could destroy Lyndon Johnson's career. Lyndon Johnson would go to jail, and he was their man. He represented all these right-wing forces. There was an urgency to kill President Kennedy. They had to save Lyndon Johnson. The governor of Texas, first of all, is Lyndon Johnson's best friend in history. They went back decades together. In the 1948 vote scandal, John Connally was every much a part of that cover-up that took place. He was his campaign manager. It is without question John Connally who entices John F. Kennedy to Texas. I'm going
to pause it right there, ladies and gentlemen, once again, and as I've been doing, coming back in 3 minutes. When we come back in, I'm going to pick it up right where I paused it. So do not go anywhere. More of The Guilty Men when we get back.
They get them there, then they're in control of everything. Motorcade routes, the evidence, the Dallas police, everything. It's their land. It's their territory. Lyndon Johnson and his Texas cronies suckered President Kennedy to Texas.
The late Madeleine Brown gained a unique insight into Johnson's role in Kennedy's assassination. She first met LBJ in 1948 at the Adolphus Hotel in downtown Dallas, when he was celebrating his election to the Senate following the infamous Box 13 scandal.
I went, I was very young, and it was wonderful. Our relationship developed immediately. Lyndon gave another campaign party in Austin. It was 3 weeks after I met him at the Adolphus, and it was scheduled at the Driscoll Hotel. And, it was so great to see him. I mean, for 3 weeks, I had thought about him and how wonderful it was. We were dancing that night, and he says, I'll see you upstairs. And he put a key in my hand. I still have that key. It was exciting. I felt naughty, but I felt good. I fell deeply in love with him. Yes, I did. I was just the other woman in his life, and my emotions are still the same for him as they were when I met him as a very young girl, but I'll always love him. He was the father of my son, Stephen.
That intimate relationship with Johnson continued for many years. Through him, she became familiar with the closed world of power politics in Texas. On the eve of Kennedy's assassination, she attended a party at this house in North Dallas, the family home of oil billionaire Clint Murchison Sr. There was an extraordinary guest list that night.
We had H.O. Hunt, Murchison, Lyndon Johnson made an appearance. We had Hoover. We had Richard Nixon. They were the most influential people there. But I was under the impression that since J. Edgar Hoover was there, that it was to honor Hoover rather than anything else. When Lyndon came in, no one was expecting him. So when Lyndon arrived at Clint Murchison's, they all went into a conference room, and you could just feel the atmosphere. And when Lyndon came out, I was, of course, happy to see him. I did not know that he was going to be there. And he whispered in my ear at that time, "Those blank-de-blank Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's no threat, that's a promise." So he departed. The party rapidly broke up after Lyndon departed.
A seamstress and companion, Mae Newman, provides confirmation that this party took place at the Murchison family home on the eve of the assassination. She lived and worked in another Murchison house in Dallas for Virginia, Clint Sr.'s second wife. She speaks here for the first time.
I started working for Virginia Murchison in 1962 until her death in 1997, approximately 36 years. I remember well the night before the assassination. I worked with a man called Jewel Pfeiffer, black man, which was Virginia Murchison's chauffeur. He got a call from her stepson, John, at the big house. They were having a big party for a very special guest that was coming from Washington to go to the party by the name of Bulldog, which I found out later was J. Edgar Hoover. And he said he was very excited about doing this, going on this trip out to the airport to take this special guest to a very special party, big party. And I asked him when he came back if he got a good tip, and he said no, and he was very, very upset. He had to go back that night to take J. Edgar Hoover to the airport to go back to Washington. And he still didn't get a tip.
Further verification of Hoover's presence in Dallas on the eve of the assassination came from a friend of Mae's who worked at the Murchison family home.
Beulah May Holman. She was the cook at John and Lupe's house. And she wanted me to go help her that night, which I didn't. But I knew she told me she was cooking quail, and I wanted the recipe, so she gave it to me. She said that it was a very important guest by the name of J. Edgar Hoover that was coming, and I should go out and help her so I could get to meet him. If it was a film star, I probably would have gone, but I didn't know who he was. No, not at that time.
Early the next morning, only a few hours before the assassination, Madeline received a phone call from Johnson, who was back in Fort Worth with Kennedy.
Lyndon called me from the Texas hotel, and he was still irate. I said, Lyndon, about last night, and he went to cursing. He used foul language all the time, and he said, those Kennedys, he repeated, they will never embarrass me again. That's no threat, that's a promise. And I'd like the entire world to know how I personally feel is the fact Lyndon Johnson knew about the assassination and was a part of it.
Dallas was to become forever linked with the murder of the president. But the rich and powerful men who had met in secret the night before had everything to gain from his death. LBJ was fearful of a long prison sentence, J. Edgar Hoover of losing his job, and the oil men of losing millions of dollars. When the shots rang out on Elm Street the next day, those problems were solved. The shock of Kennedy's assassination and its brutality reverberated around the world, but not everyone was grieving.
The mood in the Murchison family home was very joyous and happy for a whole week after, like champagne and caviar flew every day of the week. But I was the only one in that household at the time that felt any grief for his assassination.
After the president's murder, Hoover had absolute control of the cover-up. All the physical evidence relating to the crime was swiftly removed to Washington. From the beginning, Oswald was promoted as the lone nut assassin, but in LBJ's home state, tongues were wagging.
I met Lyndon on New Year's Eve at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin. And the people in Dallas, everyone was talking about Lyndon Johnson was the cause of the assassination, and it made my heart very heavy. I just couldn't believe that he could be a part of something so bad. So I confronted Lyndon. I said, Lyndon, you've got to tell me, were you part of the assassination? And of course he had a high temper fit, hit the wall, and he was very irate and angry. And he said, no, I was not, but the oil people, or he called them the fat cats of Texas that I knew, and the intelligence was the cause of the assassination. I am sure Lyndon did not make the plans per se, but he had the key people that he could call to actually do it.
If the head of the FBI and the head of the Secret Service and key lieutenants of those two figures are involved in covering up, plus the President of the United States and all his cronies, you don't need a massive conspiracy to get away with this.
After the assassination, Cliff Carter, Johnson's aide, made repeated calls from the White House to the district attorney in Dallas, Henry Wade. He was instructed to look no further than Oswald for the guilty man. There was no conspiracy. A similar call was made to the Attorney General of Texas, Waggoner Carr.
Then we have Lyndon Johnson himself calling the chief of homicide, Will Fritz, who's really doing the dirt work as far as interrogating Oswald and trying to get to the bottom of this case. He calls him and tells him, you have your man. You have your man. Let it go at that. Lyndon Johnson is trying to control what is going on with the investigation of the assassination of President Kennedy from Washington, D.C., with crucial figures in the case.
The late Dr. Charles Crenshaw experienced the new president's controlling hand. He was in the operating theater at Parkland Hospital with his colleagues, working to save Oswald's life after Jack Ruby had shot him. He was urgently called to the phone in an adjoining office.
I picked up the phone, and it was there I heard this voice like thunder. that stated, "This is the president, Lyndon B. Johnson." And he asked, "How is the accused assassin doing?" I was so startled. The thing that I could say was, he's holding his own. He's lost a large amount of blood. He said, "Would you take a message to the chief operating surgeon?" It was more of an order than a question. So I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "There is a man in the room. I would like for him to take a deathbed confession." And all of a sudden, the phone went off. I returned to the operating room. I tapped Dr. Shires on the shoulder. He looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" Everyone was working feverishly in the abdomen trying to correct the wounds there. I said, "Guess who I've been talking to?" I said, "The President of the United States called and wants that man over there to take a deathbed confession." And Shires looked at me like I was crazy. And we both realized that there was no way Lee Harvey Oswald, had he survived, would have been able to give any testimony until 2 or 3 days after the procedure. But
ladies and gentlemen, hour 1 up, hour 2 coming up. Do not go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to hour number 2 here on this morning's edition of Wake Up Call. I'm your guest host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. That is my website, federaljack.com. You can also check me out here on the Orion Talk Radio. I do a radio broadcast 4 nights a week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time. And Sundays, 5 to 7 Eastern Standard Time. I also implore you to check out Ryan Brooks right here on the network 5 days a week, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ryan does a show called The Sound of Freedom. Excellent broadcast. I give it the Siskel and Ebert 2 thumbs up. Check it out. All right, getting back into it, I want to finish up the audio I've been playing for you from The Guilty Men, and I have some other stuff lined up for you. So we're going to hop right back into it. Here's where we left off with Part 9 of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, The Guilty Men.
Still in all, the president had called, and I did relay the message.
When Dr. Crenshaw published his story in 1992, he suffered an avalanche of criticism. It was argued that Johnson made no such call. Crenshaw's critics were proved wrong by a former chief switchboard operator at Parkland Hospital, Phyllis Bartlett.
The call came in and said, hold the line for the president. And for a second, I couldn't, I was still thinking Kennedy, and I was kind of taken back for a minute, and then in a few seconds, it was just a matter of a second that he came on in a loud voice. He said, "This is Lyndon Johnson. Connect me to the accused assassins, doctor." It sounded the same as it had been on newscasts when I would hear him speak. I knew I had put a call to the operating room, so I contacted Dr. Crenshaw, and I told him, that I knew he did get the call, and that I was sorry that the people had, in the newspaper and on the TVs, had tried to discredit him. And that was when I spoke out.
From the moment he became president, Johnson had authority over every aspect of the cover-up of Kennedy's murder. He was unassailable.
Johnson has the power to contain the investigation, both nationally and locally, on the ground in Texas. More so than if it had happened, let's say, in Oregon or Wisconsin. Texas. He's got the power to give the CIA what it wants as president, as opposed to Kennedy, who they feared. He's got the power to take the National Security Action Memorandum that Kennedy had signed in November 1963, tear it up, reverse it, and create a war where 3 million soldiers wound up going to Vietnam instead of 16,000 being brought home by JFK. He can make J. Edgar Hoover director of the FBI for life. He's the man in the middle. The only person that can answer all of the questions of who's at risk, who's going to gain the most, who wins in this deal. There's only one answer to that question, and that's Lyndon Johnson. And his ticket out was Elm Street.
One of the most compelling pieces of evidence linking Johnson with the assassination is through his henchman Malcolm Wallace, the convicted killer of Douglas Kinzer. In the hours following the assassination, on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building by the southeast corner window, the Dallas police discovered an unidentified fingerprint.
The fingerprint is the ultimate part of the Mac Wallace story. The FBI fingerprinted every Texas School Book Depository employee, including the women employees who worked downstairs, never handled the boxes. They fingerprinted every Dallas officer that was in the sniper's nest so that they could remove those fingerprints from consideration. And at the end of the day, you have one fingerprint remaining. It sits in the National Archives for 35 years, until 1998. An investigator takes it to a highly qualified, certified latent print examiner, a CLPE, along with a redacted fingerprint card from Mac Wallace from the 1951 murder of John Douglas Kinzer. And he said, here's a print card. Do you see anything?
Nathan Darby is one of the most experienced fingerprint experts in the United States, with 35 years service in the U.S. military and the City of Austin Police Department.
I didn't know where it came from. And, a week or 10 days later, I called the party that had brought it over and said, well, it's a match. The finger that made the ink print also made the latent. And we called that a match or identified. And there was no question about it. They matched.
3 years later, Nathan Darby readdressed the same evidence and reconfirmed his original findings.
When he was done, he had a 34-point match. And when you mention that in criminal circles to an investigator, how confident would you feel with a 34-point match? Oh, that's a slam dunk. It can't miss. It doesn't get any better than that. You give me a 34-point match on any case in the United States, I'll take it to court and win.
The inked and the latent print are made by the same finger. And the other evidence that I've been presented with was Malcolm Wallace's left little finger, without a reasonable doubt.
Now, the fingerprint in question came from a cardboard box in the sniper's nest in Texas School Book Depository. Fingerprints do not last long on cardboard. So it's fair to say that either Malcolm Wallace was wandering around there for no purpose. He was in that sniper's nest on November 22nd. That evidence, that fingerprint evidence, along with Malcolm Wallace's sordid resume, was sent to every imaginable agency or individual that could have an interest in what happened to John Kennedy. The only people that took notice of it were the Dallas police, because it's still an open homicide on their blotter. And they took serious notice of it. And then they were told, forward it up the line, because Dallas no longer has any evidence. It's all in federal hands, even though it's an unsolved homicide. They forwarded it up the line. And it took 18 months for the FBI to say verbally, no, it's not a match. And the single most important fingerprint found in the last 35 years was buried.
I don't know why they couldn't say that the thing didn't match. It did match. There's no question about it. My experience, I've just had too much experience. I know what I'm talking about. I'm positive. No question about it. My dying declaration, if I was to drop dead right now, they match.
It's still the big lie. It's unknown. It's unidentified. No, it's identified. It's Malcolm Wallace, and he's linked to Estes, Carter, and Lyndon B. Johnson directly.
According to the official record, Malcolm Wallace died in a single car accident on this lonely stretch of Texas highway on the night of January 7th, 1971. There were no witnesses. His body was taken to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead. He was buried here close to other family members. 8 months later, another key member of LBJ's inner circle, presidential aide Cliff Carter, died unexpectedly. But shortly before his death, he met with Billy Solestes.
I'm going to pause it right there. We're going to pick it up with the final few minutes of The Guilty Men, Part 9 of The Men Who Killed Kennedy. When we come back on the other side of this break, and then we'll get into a few other things for you. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and I'm going to finish up and play the final few minutes here of The Guilty Men from The Men Who Killed Kennedy, Part 9, one of the 3 parts that was put into the memory hole. And then I'm going to get into false flag hack attacks. So let me finish up this audio really quick. Here's the ending, last couple minutes, of The Guilty Men, Part 9 of The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
8 months later, another key member of LBJ's inner circle, presidential aide Cliff Carter, died unexpectedly. But shortly before his death, he met with Billy Solestes.
They discuss all these murders that Cliff Carter is knowledgeable about. Now, Billy knows about some of them, but Cliff knows about more, and he fills him in on all the details. Malcolm Wallace being a central figure in most of these murders. And there are over 17 murders that Carter tells Estes about. And he actually tells Estes that he fears for his own life. And within 2 days' time, he's dead.
Johnson's attorney, Edward Clark, was one person who prospered. But when LBJ was brought low by the Vietnam War and decided not to run for a second term, Clark felt shortchanged for his role in the assassination, according to his legal partner, Barr McClellan.
He expected $8 million spread over 8 years, over the 2 terms Johnson was to serve. When those terms were cut short by Johnson's sudden and unexpected resignation, Clark was $4 million short. He was not a man to be denied. When he had done a service, he was going to be paid. Planning ahead, he went to Big Oil and Big D, went to Clint Murchison to say, look, I've done y'all a great service. I deserve more. I'm going to get it. Murchison agreed with him and suggested he file for a well in the middle of the great East Texas oil field. He called me in as his personal attorney to make the first bid for getting that money, and he was not successful in getting $4 million, but he got his $2 million. So when all was said and done, Clark realized $6 million for the assassination of John Kennedy.
Barr McClellan believes documentary proof of these dark deeds lies in the Johnson-Clark legal records. For many years, they were kept in a high-security area above the Clark offices, known as the penthouse.
Any of us attorneys could get into the general area, but the secret area, the Johnson area, was locked off, accessible to no one. I have a strong belief that there are substantial records somewhere that show this conspiracy and its both evolution, its execution, and its cover-up. But I don't know where they'd be. We need to see them.
Johnson was ultimately consumed by the high office he had so unscrupulously striven for. A broken man, he retreated to his Texas ranch, where his lawyers were to secretly summon a psychiatrist to deal with his deepening depression.
An immediate concern at the law firm was that he would say too much. The $1 million was available to the psychiatrist to keep anything from coming out. The one reason for all these protections was the greatest demon that was dogging Johnson at the time, and that was the assassination of John Kennedy and the role he played in it. We had to keep it covered up, and for sure we had to keep the psychiatrist muzzled, and we did. But if any one set of records needs to be produced, the psychiatric records should be disclosed to the American public, because they will, I am confident, disclose his role in the assassination.
Only 4 years after leaving office, Johnson died. But there are those living who are still afraid to come forward to tell what they know about the guilty men.
People are afraid of him dead. He's been dead since 1973, and his shadow still casts fear in this country, especially in Texas.
Undaunted, across the nation, the questioning voice of the American people will not be silenced. An overwhelming majority refuse to accept their government's version of what happened in Dallas on November the 22nd, 1963.
There's no statute of limitations on murder. If they're still continuing to cover it up in 20 more years, that's obstruction of justice. It's a conspiracy. The men who killed Kennedy don't end with the people who pulled triggers. It should be important to all of us that we get to the bottom of this.
Just as John Kennedy's car took an incredible turn when it went on to Elm Street, 300 feet later, our form of government, our way of life, our way of respecting our government, our way of being respected by our government, took that same kind of bizarre wide turn. And we haven't gotten back on the straight and narrow yet.
The Kennedy assassination was the end of faith in government. And so it's up to the little man to fight the odds. Davy Crockett, Sisyphus pushing his rock. Someone has to keep fighting the odds. And even though you know the chances are that you're never going to get a resolution to what you're fighting for, you have to fight for it anyway. Just the principle of justice. Just the principles of American democracy. Don't give up. Keep fighting.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are officially through Part 9 of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, The Guilty Men. Now, I urge, if you have not seen the video, if this is the first time you are ever being exposed to this audio, I urge you to go to YouTube right now. Or when you get a chance, just write it down if you have a pencil or a pen, or you can put it in your smartphone or whatever. Guilty Men, Part 9, Men Who Killed Kennedy. And when you get a chance, I want you to go on Netflix. And don't blame Netflix. This is the information that they're given from the History Channel. But go on Netflix, and I say that because it's a big thing and many people have it. Go on Netflix, look up The Men Who Killed Kennedy. It'll say it's a 6-part series. You could probably rent the first 6 parts. Go to the History Channel. Go to their little store where they sell their DVDs. Type in the search bar, The Men Who Killed Kennedy. It'll say it's a 6-part series. They're lying. Netflix really isn't lying. They're just going off of the History Channel's information. History Channel is knowingly lying to you. You just heard produced audio from a full produced video that is officially and did air at least once on the History Channel before it was removed. A full, 45 minutes of audio? Well, just shy of 45 minutes of audio. But it doesn't exist. And there's 2 more pieces to it. In fact, make sure you tune in this Thursday. This Thursday, Thanksgiving, if you haven't, after you're done eating your turkey, turn on Orion. Turn your computer on. You can put it on TuneIn, put it on your phone, put it on your home entertainment system. We're going to be doing a special broadcast because Thursday, Thanksgiving, happens to also fall on what day, ladies and gentlemen? The 22nd. The 49th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And the owner of the Orion Talk Radio Network, Mr. Jimmy X, has decided that he is going to dedicate at least 9 hours to playing audio concerning the JFK assassination. And one of the things we're going to be playing is the missing 3 pieces in their entirety. The missing 3 pieces of the men who killed Kennedy. 7, 8, and 9. The smoking guns, the love affair, and you'll be able to hear The Guilty Men in its entirety again. So make sure to tune in to Orion, 3 p.m. this Thursday. Going all the way to midnight. And if we start any earlier, we'll update you and let you know. We'll be right back. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Wake Up Call. I'm your guest host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. That is my website. Go check it out. It's a free news archive. It is updated on the regular. There's a ton of free movies there, videos, ebooks, and more. It's all for free. Go check it out. federaljack.com. Getting into a few other things. I've talked about, obviously, the JFK assassination. I played the audio for you here from The Guilty Men. I want to shift gears, and I want to get into cybersecurity. Now, I'm sure everybody has heard about the impending executive order from dictator Obozo about controlling the internet. It's coming out, Congress keeps trying to pass internet control legislation, and it keeps getting shot down. So Obama's like, well, I'm a dictator in chief, so I'll just do whatever I want anyway. Well, it'd be January, I think it was 20th. So like January 20th of this year, the beginning of 2012, I had a friend of mine on my broadcast here on Orion. His name is Winston, and he is a hacker. He's a white hat hacker, I guess you could say. And he comes on from time to time, and he discusses cybersecurity, what's going on with Anonymous, things like that. Well, on that broadcast, and when he came on another time, I believe it was June or July, he came on, and both times he had talked about false flag hack attacks being used to put, kind of like 9/11, to push for this. 9/11 was this push for an endless police state. Well, and the Patriot Act. Well, same thing. These false flag hack attacks would be used to push an internet 9/11, if you will, and that there's an Internet Patriot Act and all this stuff. And I have talked about this before. In fact, if you look up Lawrence Lessing, he's a professor at Stanford Law. If you look him up, you could see he's a law professor, and he's talked about the Internet Patriot Act, and he talked to Richard Clarke. I made a whole video about this. You can look it up on federaljack.com. It's titled False Flag Hack Attacks Being Used to Bring About Control of the Free and Open Internet, or something to that effect. Just go to federaljack.com and type in false flag hack attacks being used to. I'm sure the article will pop up. Anyway, it's a video I made. It's a little over an hour long, and it shows you all this stuff. And in there is some of the audio from this. What I'm going to play for you. It's an interview I did. It's some pieces of both the interviews I've done that I cut up and put together or I should say two of the interviews I've done with Winston about this subject. And I want to play it for you because it's I keep bringing this up and showing this to people and reminding people about this because a couple months back there were other things on the plate people were paying attention to, and here you have again Congress can't pass their cybersecurity legislation. It gets shot down. So what happens? Like I said, the dictator in chief wants to push forward with his own. So I want to play you this because Winston warns about false flag hack attacks. Don't buy into it, what to pay attention to. And he is a hacker, so it's important. And he gives a little bit of background about how they've been setting this whole thing in people's heads. That's where he's going to start off. He's talking about the movie Hackers and how they use predictive programming. And you're going to hear him talk about Kevin Mitnick. So here, check it out. This is my interview with my regular guest on my broadcast, Down the Rabbit Hole, Mr. Winston Smith, white hat hacker.
Last 15 or so years, Hollywood's been pushing certain themes in all hacker-related films. As far back as 15 years ago in the movie Hackers from 1994, you've got that. You've got the whole premise of that movie is a white hat security researcher developed a virus that's going to sink some oil tankers as a distraction for stealing some money, and then the attack gets blamed on hackers. Then you have Die Hard 4, which is another movie based on infrastructure attacks where hackers are attacking the critical infrastructure of the city. Then you have movies like Takedown, which is the Miramax picture, which is a fictionalized account of Kevin Mitnick, the the hacker from California, and that film, Kevin Mitnick hacks into a white hat security researcher, one of the good guys who worked with the government, and found a proof of concept virus that he wrote, which attacks SCADA systems and attacks industrial, nuclear plants, water lines, that type of thing. And these types of themes are prevalent throughout all these movies. And within the last several years, we've seen these actual white hat, government-funded, corporate proof of concepts tools start to come out for infrastructure attacks. On the most extreme examples are the Stuxnet virus and the Dooku virus, which have already been proven to come from governments and Israeli government and U.S. government sources. And then you'll have at every hacker conference that comes out, you'll have these floods of SCADA attack tools developed by not by black hat hackers, but by white hat security professionals who work for vulnerability firms, and they're simply developed and simply interested in getting their name out there and finding the latest vulnerabilities in these SCADA systems, because that's the latest buzzword around the information security system is SCADA protection and critical infrastructure protection. But all this is leading to is there's going to be a large-scale attack on SCADA systems, which will be false flagged by the New World Order, and it will be used, and they will end up doing exactly what the films had said they were going to do, and they're going to end up blaming hackers and throwing the anonymous matter on the attack. So when a large-scale SCADA attack does happen, don't look to basement-dwelling anonymous people. Look towards white hat security professionals and their government contracting firms who are developing it and speaking at conferences about these attacks, because they're the ones who are standing to profit from patching the vulnerabilities and implementing the solutions for it. For a long time, the critical infrastructure aspects of society, like the nuclear power plants and the dams and the sewer pipelines and all that stuff, all those things used to never be internet connected. It's considered crazy. You don't consider making that a public-facing infrastructure. But as everything starts being given IP addresses, even now washing machines are being given IP addresses, things end up on the internet. And even if a single outside machine can get compromised into this eternal network, then it is possible to worm through and get control of it. Especially considering a lot of these SCADA systems are ridiculously simple, using programming languages and architectures from 20 years ago. And the reason is they were never meant to be internet facing, but they are now. And there's going to be an attack on them, and it's going to be backed by the government so that they can use it to continue to implement controls and restrict internet freedoms, get things like SOPA and PIPA and all sorts of other restrictive internet legislations passed under the guise of protecting society from these critical infrastructure attacks by these wily groups of hackers. People in the hacker community and the information security community in general, they should really just follow the news and follow developments on SCADA vulnerabilities that are being released and discovered, and who's the one discovering them? What are they? What's the purpose of it? A lot of it is just legitimate researchers trying to make a name off of a hot topic, make a name for themselves off finding vulns in a system that's very popular to do right now. They can make a lot of money finding vulnerabilities and then getting contracts for the companies. There's nothing wrong with that. But what is the problem is once those vulnerabilities are indexed and cataloged, the government will pick and choose which ones they want to do. Put together a black ops team to carry it out, and then blame it on a group like Anonymous.
Yeah, and then some 14 or 15-year-old kid will be the patsy.
The Bin Laden of the internet.
Yeah, and they'll make them go down in history as the bad guy when in reality it's not. It's unbelievable what's going on. 10 years ago, if you had told me this kind of stuff was going to happen, I would tell you that you were, you've watched too many. You watched The Matrix one too many times, perhaps.
Yeah, it's the same thing like with the Lone Gunman TV show regarding 9/11. There are all sorts of Hollywood movies.
Predictive programming is what you're referring to. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. They'll have topics in films and mainstream media and mainstream film, movies and TV shows about things like the Twin Towers getting blown up or planes getting hijacked and crashed into them years before 9/11. And it's so basically they're all they're going off these war game scenarios that have been developed. And SCADA attacks are one of the most popular war game scenarios right now for the federal government.
I'm going to pause it right there, ladies and gentlemen. And coming out of the break, I'm going to pick it up right where we're leaving off so I can get as much of the audio in for you as possible in the final segment. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Final segment, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to pick it up right where we left off with my interview with hacker Winston Smith about false flag hack attacks being used to bring about control of the free and open internet. Here we go. Those in the hacker community that hear this live broadcast later on, you pull the archive or you hear it on YouTube, guys, whatever senses you use to, work and do your magic, keep an eye out on what's going on, because you guys will be what saves the day. It's going to be you people that help save the internet. Okay, so keep your eyes open. I'll give out your warning one more time, just in case.
Yeah, the main warning is to keep an eye out on SCADA system vulnerability publications. Keep an eye on who's releasing them, what type of vulnerabilities there are, what type of systems there are, and just and keep an eye out for government war game scenarios. They always advertise. They always advertise these types of scenarios when they're going to make them, when they're going to make a big thing of it. A lot of it goes unadvertised. And if you're working within government, keep an eye out for those red team, blue team type exercises. And eventually one of those might, one of those contractors that are being brought in might have an agreement with some darker forces to be able to marshal some stuff in. So everyone has to be on their top diligence, not really, and mostly looking towards the inside, looking at the contractors and the intelligence connections of those involved in your research.
You warned about the SCADA system attacks that they would launch. When I say they, I mean this, whatever you want to call them, this elitist group that control things. They would either have contractors do it or the government itself, an agency in the government itself do it, and then they could blame Anonymous or they could blame, a foreign country, whatever. In this case, a couple months ago, it looked like they would have blamed Anonymous. Now it looks like they're aiming that weapon of mass deception at Iran. And you see them talking about how, Iran could hack our infrastructure and take down power stations and everything else. So you know better than me about infrastructure and how that's such crap. So go ahead, I'll give you the floor. Explain to the listeners how that whole thing with the attacking Iran thing is crap. And go ahead and you can gloat if you want that you called it and said that they were going to try this.
They're basically following the playbook that they've laid out that we discussed on the last couple times I was on. They're gearing up to do a false flag attack against the SCADA systems in the United States. And for new listeners, SCADA systems are the automated controllers that are in charge of things like water systems, nuclear power plants, electrical grids, the critical infrastructure. And a lot of the technology is 20, 30 years old and shouldn't be put on the internet, but a lot of it, a lot of stuff that they have been updated has been put online. Some of the attacks that are coming through that are being developed now are against these old systems in order to attack critical infrastructure. And the only real motivation that a hacker would want to take over these systems for is to do some kind of damage to the infrastructure. And the only people who would really benefit from that are either foreign countries that are seeking to attack, or from the government itself that's seeking to do some kind of false flag attack. And that seems to be where they're going. We using groups like Anonymous as a proxy or as a front. They're seeking to do attacks on the United States and blame it on countries like Iran. And you can see in the recent news reports that that's exactly where they're heading. They can dovetail Anonymous into the mix by saying Anonymous was assisting topple regimes during the Arab Spring and all that stuff. And those are the anonymous participation in the Arab Spring Revolution has been confirmed a State Department false flag operation. There are chat logs on Pastebin that reveal basically admissions of such, and that seems to be where it's heading now. And what you can start to see in mainstream news reports that the government is warning of attacks against critical infrastructure, specifically on the SCADA systems from rogue enemies such as Iran or terrorist groups like Al Qaeda are seeking to attack critical infrastructure by attacking our SCADA systems. And that basically just means they're starting to war game these scenarios and to develop attacks themselves. And then once they will pull something major, they're going to use that to pass legislation and restrict the internet even further. It seems like the one major thing they need to get these restrictive legislations passed is some kind of internet, like some kind of catalyst online that will get people behind it, just like the Project for New American Century said they need a new Pearl Harbor in order to go into the Middle East, and they engineered 9/11 in order to pass this, but they're going to need some kind of internet Pearl Harbor, and they're working on doing that with SCADA attacks.
And it looks like they're going to try to pinpoint it on Iran so they could get a 1-2 punch. That would, knowing them, because they never do things, on just to benefit on one level. If anybody wonders why they would blame Iran, well, it's a 1-2 punch. One, they can bring in this legislation to quote unquote protect the internet, because it's always about our protection, and they can declare war on Iran.
An act of war.
Yeah,
they'd be able to dub this cyber offensive as an act of war.
The Pentagon already said they would react to a cyber attack with real bombs.
That's where they're going with it, and it's becoming more and more apparent as time goes on through mainstream media press releases, because there's more and more coverage on things like scary Arab countries, scary Persian countries attacking our critical infrastructure using SCADA vulnerabilities and things like anonymous, working to either topple or prop up regimes in the area when it's all just being puppeted from a blue State Department.
What do you guys, the hacker community, think about all this? What's the chatter?
Among the people who know what's going on and are informed about the New World Order and the big picture, the chatter is that it's pretty much everyone pretty much agrees that this is where they're going with it, and everyone's kind of has their eyes open for it.
And I'm going to fast forward it because we only got a few minutes left here, but he makes an interesting statement about the State Department and Anonymous, because he had mentioned Anonymous in the Arab Spring. He makes an interesting comment about it. I wanted to let you guys hear really quick. Check this out.
With Anonymous and the U.S. State Department, it's not really officially admitted, but when there are a bunch of chat logs on Pastebin from the Anonops IRC network that discuss different informant groups like Backtrace Security and a few others and there's discussions between what appear to be FBI agents and State Department officials discussing networks of informants on Anonymous, and they're aside from those campaigns, a lot of the campaigns that they're coming out with are pretty much just fakes being put out by these provocateurs. Like they recently had Operation Global Blackout, which was supposedly going to attack the DNS servers of the internet, and that turned to be absolutely nothing.
So who's left doing all these Anonops then? Is half of that is fake, and then I know Anonops itself that's the real board, right? The message board.
Right. But anyone can join. So like anyone can sign on to there and start a campaign up. And a lot of the most recent campaigns that have been getting a lot of press attention have been fakes. Some of the real stuff that's been going on, you have the Russian anonymous hacking groups. They're starting to target Russian government websites and Vladimir Putin. And I don't know if those are actual Russian who are members of Anonymous. The media is saying that they're Russian activists, but Russian hackers don't usually attack Russian websites. It's kind of just part of their culture that they don't do that. They usually only attack foreign websites, a lot like Chinese hackers. So it's most likely anons who are either sympathetic towards the Russian people, or this is another State Department false flag where they're going after Russian intelligence services. And branding it as anonymous, and that sounds more like it. So that seems to be going on there.
And that happens a lot, right? Where the State Department's going, doing these false flag attacks, and it's really the State Department doing it.
Yeah, it happened all through the Arab Spring, and now if you go to Google News right now and type anonymous hacker, the top 2 stories are the quote unquote Russian anonymous groups targeting Russian government websites of Vladimir Putin, which on the surface looks very much like a false flag from our side, because Russian hackers do not attack Russian websites. That's why they're able to operate the way they operate, because they know it's a hands-off type deal. They won't get bothered if they follow the rules. And the second. The second link is a hacker from Anonymous is claiming to have leaked the VMware ESX hypervisor source code, which is a virtualization engine, and the source code for it was obtained off a Chinese military contract.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to stop it there. You can hear the full interview on my archive channels. There's a couple of them. Just look up Hacker Winston Smith or Internet Warnings. There's a couple of them up there. Thank you for tuning in this morning. It has been an honor sitting in for Rudy Z. I'm sure he will be back tomorrow. Thank you all for tuning in. Become an autodidact. Educate yourselves. Check me out. Down the rabbit hole. FederalJack.com. I'm out of here.